Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Now, if you missed it, our GTX 1650 review went up a few days ago, and it's done really well for us. I guess NVIDIA messing the media around by withholding the driver seemed to generate a bit of buzz for this one. Anyway, it resulted in about, I think it was 2,000 comments on that video, so we've got plenty to go over, and yeah, I think that being the case, we should probably just jump straight into it and get on with the first question, because this will be a rather long replying to comments episode. Okay, I'm going to start this one off on a bit of a positive note. Good to do that every now and then. And we do have a nice comment here from Konza. Also, I happen to agree with what he says, not just because it's a nice comment. Anyway, he says, these reviews are just as important as reviews for good cards. And I really agree with that. Perhaps more important, and yeah, I kind of agree with that as well. It's good for all of us to know not to buy 1650s at launch price. So great work, Steve. Thank you very much. So yeah, I completely agree with that. The 1650s at the $150 US MSRP aren't good value, and really it's all about the price, especially with these cheap budget entry-ish level cards. So yeah, I think it's really important that you guys know that there are better value options. The 1650 is not a horrible performing card. It's not a bad card, but it is, in my opinion, pointless at the $150 price point. Others like Gamers Nexus and, well, a lot of others agree with me on that one. It does have its place, and we'll discuss that as we go through this video, but it's a very niche place. So yeah, anyway, we'll cover that later in the video. But yeah, good question that, and I completely agree. It's really good to cover all these products, because I think by just saying, oh, the 1650 is a garbage product for whatever reason, and we're not going to bother with it because it's not worth investing time in, then I think that does our audience a disservice. So it's really important for you guys to have that information there, whether you're buying it now or in 6 months' time, because 6 months' time the price may not have changed. But if it has changed, and you can at least see our benchmark numbers, but we'll probably do updated stuff by then anyway. But anyway, important to cover, moving on. Okay, so it wasn't going to be too long before we got one of these 75-watt comments. There were a shipload of them, and here is a random example from Brandon. Why the bad press? Time out, this is a 75-watt card, 75 watts. It's certainly got a use case as the most powerful card to not need power beyond from the motherboard. The fact that no tech reviews realize this show just how clueless they are. Yes, Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed, and the rest of the tech review community are just all a bunch of dummies. Okay, so as noted in my GTX 1650 review, it is very low powered and it's extremely efficient. That's all good and well, but it's not really the most important thing for the majority of you. At least I don't believe it is. And it's just one of many factors. And again, I don't believe it's the most important factor. Maybe it's a top 3 consideration. But for me, price and performance are without question the more important aspects of any gaming graphics card. I'm also not entirely sure why some of our audience are pretending that a significant portion of the audience are limited to PCIe slot power delivery. I myself have been combing the internet for a system to use for a benchmark system for comparing a few low-powered graphics cards, and it really hasn't been that easy to find one. Most of them are just old junkers that really couldn't get the most out of a GTX 1050, let alone a 1650. And why the bloody hell are you guys so keen to spend $150 US to put a graphics card in a system that's maybe worth $200, usually less? Anyway, I'll cover that one in a bit more depth shortly. I think for now we'll just move on to the next question. Okay, next question is from... Anyway, next question. I don't know, man. For $150, it's not bad if it runs games at 1080p, 60 FPS, Ultra. Yeah, okay, well, firstly, it didn't come close to doing that in a few of the titles, such as The Division 2, Far Cry New Dawn, Just Cause 4, Metro Exodus, and definitely Shadow of the Tomb Raider. In most of those games, though, it's important to note that the RX 570 did, and it's also cheaper. So that is the main issue, mate. Like, a cheaper... Anyway, so we're not saying that the GTX 1650 can't deliver playable or even an enjoyable gaming experience, because, well, it can. As you noted, the performance in some of the games is quite good. We're just saying that, well, there's a 3-year-old card that's faster, and for, what has it been like the last year, it's been cheaper. So, yeah, that's kind of the issue there. We have the RX 570 that's faster and cheaper. So that kind of makes the GTX 1650 a tough sell for the vast majority of our audience. Pretty much anybody upgrading a relatively new computer or building a new computer should avoid the 1650 like the plague, because the RX 570 is just way better value. But anyway, we'll move on. I won't get stuck on any one question. Okay, let's move on to the next question here. Stop comparing this to the RX 570 because it's pointless to do so. Hopefully he goes on. This card draws 115 watts less on average, is newer, has better temps, and is perfect for cheaper PSUs or some older systems. You got 2 free games with RX 570? Question? I think so, yep. Okay, great. You'll pay them as times goes by since you'll spend more money on the bills. Well, okay, there's actually quite a bit to unpack here. There's a few points to this comment. But anyway, we'll start with the first one and we'll work our way through it. So we'll start with the power thing. I've already started to address this one, but let's go a bit further with it. I think that's an irrelevant point for 90-something% of all gamers. Firstly, the RX 570 draws around twice as much power. So it's about 70-ish watts more. It's not 115 watts. Again, that is quite a significant difference, but it is up to 25% faster in quite a few titles. So claiming that it's pointless to compare the GTX 1650 to the cheaper RX 570 is just, well, it's just insane in my opinion. I don't really know where you're coming from on that one. Again, you're acting like everyone in our audience has a 10-year-old PC with a PSU that can't be upgraded or can't support PCI Express graphics cards. So yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, that one. Not sure what else to say on it, but I'm surprised there's so many people that are acting like, yeah, everyone has a really old OEM system that they have no other option but to use a GTX 1650. And again, I'm not even convinced that a GTX 1650 will be much faster or any faster than the GTX 1050 in these older systems. It's definitely something I want to look into at a later date. Then there was the bit, about you got 2 free games. So I'm glad you brought that one up because, yeah, the RX 570 does come with 2 rather popular AAA titles. Or I think you get your choice of 2 out of 3 titles, something like that. I don't usually bang on about that too much because I don't think it applies to all regions. It's usually like a limited time thing, but it keeps getting stretched out and goes on. And it is probably worth mentioning more than I do, and I've made a few jokes about how the AMD fans always get upset for me for not talking about the free games bundle, but it is an impressive bundle, and it really does make this, well, it makes the RX 570 a really great value card, especially if you want to play those 2 games because they're probably worth about what you'd pay for the card. So you're essentially getting the card for free. I don't like to look at it that way or push it that way because it won't apply for everyone. But anyway, there is the 2 free games. Then finally, we have the power bill argument. And yeah, that kind of makes sense depending on the region that you live in, so your cost of power, and really how much you game. For example, here in Australia, power is pretty expensive. I pay around 40 cents per kilowatt hour. It's something like half that 20 cents off peak, but the off peak hours are very brief and they're really off peak. Anyway, if you averaged 1 hour of gameplay per day, I think I worked it out with the RX 570, which uses 70 watts more than the GTX 1650. It'd work out to be $10 more per year to run the Radeon GPU. So yeah, again, it depends on how much you pay for power and how often you game. If 1 hour a day as an average is a lot because, well, that's 7 hours a week. I mean, some of you probably laugh and go, 7 hours a week, that's nothing. For me, 7 hours a month is a pretty good month for me on gaming, but I'm busy with work and a family and whatnot, so that wasn't the case in my early 20s. Tim probably gets in a lot more gaming than I do, even though he seems to do a lot of work as well. But anyway, getting sidetracked, 1 hour a day amounts to a $10 difference if you pay quite a bit for electricity. So yeah, it's really up to you guys to determine how significant that is. In 2 or 3 years' time, you will have broken even in the cost between the RX 570 and the GTX 1650. So yeah. And yeah, given that formula, or well, how that works in my region. So that is 1 hour per day equaling $10 per year. You can probably calculate at my rather expensive cost of power what 2 hours would equate to, 3 hours, and so on. So yeah, I think once, for me personally, if I started doing 3 hours of gaming a day on average, the power savings for the GTX 1650 do become quite significant. But remember, the RX 570 is often up to 20% faster, so there's also that. It's just not a simple power thing. It's one aspect to take into consideration, but as I said earlier, for me it's a top 3 thing, ranking third. And yeah, the RX 570, it's 3 years old. So again, I know I've already said this, but it's a 3-year-old product. So if you're coming to market with a new product to compete with a 3-year-old product, you kind of need more than just to be able to justify that it's for niche PCs or it makes your power bill less. You need something more compelling than that when you bring a new product to market. It has to be better in terms of either performance or cost or whatever, but it can't just be more efficient. So next question. I hope I'm not being too ranty or all over the place with this replying to comments. I don't really script that much of this. I just have a few notes to go off, and yeah, sometimes I get a little bit carried away with answering the questions or addressing the comments rather. Anyway, I like this observation by Dompa Pro. Hopefully that's correct there. He says, Bitwit got 28 to 32 FPS and shut over the Tomb Raider at 1080p Ultra, but then again he tested on an i5 3450, but that's a huge difference. Yeah, that is a big difference, and in that section of the game, the GTX 1650 without a CPU bottleneck should be averaging around 50 FPS, and that makes it 50% faster than what Kyle showed in his video. By the way, that was a really cool video by Kyle. He sort of took a different approach to checking out the 1650. I really enjoyed the video myself. He did test the 1650 in a case with a 6-pin PCIe power connector, but not going to blame Kyle for that one. As I said, I've been combing the internet looking for a system that makes sense to test the 1650 and to validate the argument that so many well, I don't know if they're NVIDIA fans, but people are making, and I'm having a lot of trouble doing it. But yeah, really cool video there by Kyle. I would have loved to see a follow-up video where he tests something like the 1050 Ti and the RX 570. I'll probably end up doing that video myself, but it'd be good to have someone else do it as well. But anyway, really cool video by Kyle, and I will link it in the description below because it's definitely worth checking out. So we did learn a few things from Kyle's video, or at least a few of my hunches were somewhat proven. So if you're installing a GTX 1650 in an older system, there's a very good chance in modern titles you won't be running anywhere near the full potential of the GPU. Now, Kyle was consistently seeing GPU utilization below 90%, often down around 70%, sometimes even lower, and that was in the titles that he tested. So some new titles, some not new titles. But yeah, he's using a locked Ivy Bridge Core i5, which a lot of people think, hey, that's a good gaming processor, and it's by no means terrible, but it simply couldn't process the information fast enough, and that left the GPU waiting before it could render the next frame. And it's also probably not the best showing of an Ivy Bridge Core i5 because those OEM systems generally don't have the lowest latency, highest frequency memory either. So yeah, not a great showing there for the Core i5. So my point is, in these older systems, the GTX 1650 won't be much of an upgrade over something like a GTX 1050 Ti or perhaps even an RX 560. So yeah, interesting one that. And again, I don't really understand the argument or understand why people would be spending $150 US on a graphics card for these old rigs. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. For me, if you were going to buy a new graphics card, something like a 4GB RX 560 for $100, that would probably be a better option and work, well, it'd work just as well, I think. Or ideally, I think the best way to go about an old secondhand system, or just a really dated system that sort of qualifies as being secondhand, well, a secondhand graphics card for around $50, that would probably work well. So yeah, I don't know why you'd be putting a new graphics card in a decade-old PC. Again, especially one that costs $150 US. And just finally on this comment, another thing that I've seen pop up quite a bit is the ease of install argument. I've seen this quite a few times now. The GTX 1650 just slots into the system, no need for power supply changes or upgrades or whatever, or connecting anything. You just slot that thing in, tighten up the screw, and away you go. So that's the argument, but as Kyle proved in his video, that is often far from the truth. Just to get the 1650 up and running in his system, he had to install the latest BIOS. So he had to download and install the latest BIOS, and really, that is often much riskier and harder than upgrading a power supply. So yeah, it's not always as easy as it seems. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, next comment here is from Down Phoenix. So if it's a horrible product, what graphics card would you recommend for a low power setup? Because from the benchmarks I've seen, it seems to quite handily be the most powerful GPU that doesn't require extra power. Okay, so as I was just saying, most of these, in these older systems, a GTX, what was it, a 1050 or an RX 560, they will not only be cheaper, but they probably should deliver a similar or the same level of performance due to heavy CPU bottlenecking. And yeah, I'm just sort of assuming that I have done a lot of testing on this sort of stuff in the past, so I have a reasonable idea of what I'm talking about, but I will have some hard evidence of this in the near future because I have ordered an older system, not crazy old, like I think it's another Ivy Bridge, or maybe it's even a Haswell. It's a locked Core i5 and it's got 8 gigabytes of memory. It was like 350 Aussie dollars. Anyway, I've purchased that, it's on the way. I'll have a video up as soon as I can, and we'll be comparing all these graphics cards in that system, and yeah, we'll know then what's what. Again, what I can tell you is that there isn't a single use case where the GTX 1650 makes an ounce of sense when building a new PC, or even upgrading a decent PC made in the last 5 years or so. Okay, next comment. I think you are underestimating the importance for many in having a quieter PC and lower power consumption. Okay, so this is another interesting point, the thing about operating volume. No base model 1650 that I'm aware of, so that is the $150 models. None of them are particularly impressive when it comes to operating volume. For example, they're no quieter than your average, RX 570 or really any other AIB graphics card for that matter. And this is because you aren't getting the same cooler that comes on an RX 570 or a GTX 1660 Ti or any of the other more expensive graphics cards. You're getting a cooler that's rated to dissipate 75 watts. I've already shown how light the base model 1650s are. They have tiny aluminium coolers and budget power delivery components on board. There's one there. So there's an expensive 1650, but I think it's $180. And there's a $150 model. Anyway, I might throw up some B-roll in a moment just to show you the difference. But the cooler on the base models is extremely wimpy. It's very small, but it does the job because it's only putting out, well, it only has to deal with 75 watts. But they're not sticking on your 150 watt or bigger coolers that you get on the higher end graphics cards because it costs more money to do so and cuts into margins. And if you do get a 1650 with a nice big quiet cooler, well, you're paying silly money for it. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, you're not really getting a quiet graphics card. You're just getting it is quiet, but it's not quieter than other graphics cards with appropriate coolers. Finally, I'd just like to add that the margins for AIBs, so that's your Gigabytes, ASUS, MSI, those guys, their margins on the GTX 1650s are much higher than that of the RX 570s, as the 570s require a cooler rated to dissipate 150 watts, along with higher quality VRM components to handle all that extra load. So for the end user, the consumer, you guys, the only thing you'll really notice are those extra frames. Quick comment here from Evan. OMFG, what is that nuclear factory besides you? Oh, this thing, my coffee ripper build, it's whatever. Okay, next comment here is from GoWebs. Actually, I disagree. Okay, the 1650 is worth buying for someone with low wattage power supply. Okay, yeah. Over time, it will be worth it because it will save on power. Sort of addressed that one already. The reason why NVIDIA and other part makers will stop giving you samples and drivers is, wait for it, this will be good, you continue bad-mouthing their products. I won't use anyone that mouths my product. Good luck destroying your channel, lol. Oh, why did I put that comment in there? I think we'll just move on. Okay, we got another comment. Let's hope this one's a little more intelligent. This existence of this card isn't pointless. They are great for home theater PC use. Not every purchaser of a GPU will utilize them for FPS gaming. They are low power, don't need additional cables due to lack of power connector, comes in mini model, faster than 1050 Ti, support for HEVC, etc. I recently got a 1050 Ti and it works very well at video processing for Mad VR, even upscaling movies to 4K. I would have bought the 1650 if I had been following NVIDIA news. Well, kind of a funny thing about that one, if you had been following the NVIDIA news, you'd know that the 1650 won't really be any upgrade over your 1050 Ti for encoding tasks. NVIDIA didn't include the Turing encoder in the 1650, so bit of an odd choice on that one. I don't think anyone's really worked out why, apart from maybe it's cheaper to use the one they did. So they've gone with the older Volta encoder, which is basically the same thing we saw in Pascal, just with added support for higher bitrate VP9 decoding. So yeah, again, for your use case, it is kind of pointless. It's a more expensive version of what you already have. So was that worth waiting 3 years for? Okay, so we must be getting to some good comments by now. Sorry, I say that as I just read the start of this one. All right, let's get into this. Title/thumbnail just confirms the bias of this channel. In my opinion, you're in the same bucket as Adored TV and all other Hail AMD channels. Well, Jim and I have shared the same bucket in the past, and it didn't end too well for the bucket. Seriously though, I just love that the title and thumbnail triggered this response, honestly. Yeah, I mean, you should probably go watch my Hail AMD Radeon 7 and RX 590 reviews. That's all I'm going to say on that one. Oh man, I've got like a dozen more comments, but I feel like we've probably addressed just about everything we can at this point. So yeah, I just want to get back to benchmarking, so I think we'll wrap this video up. I have purchased an older system. I was about to say a new system, but it'll be new for me, but it's a very old system. Again, it was $350 Aussie. It's a Dell Optiplex. I think it's a 3020. It's a desktop system. It's got a Core i5. I think from memory, it's a 4590. But I know it has no PCIe power. So yeah, that'll be a good candidate for testing what we need to. It does have a custom motherboard as well, so you can't just drop in an ATX power supply. So yeah, it's really the perfect system to prove this theory that I believe something like a GTX 1050 Ti or an RX 560 will be quite comparable to a 1650 in that system. But yeah, anyway, we'll look into it. And even if they're not going to be miles slower. And I really don't think it's worth spending $150 on a system, because I think it's 250 Aussie dollars for a 1650, and I just paid $350 for the computer. So yeah, I mean, it will allow you to play things like Fortnite and that quite well. But anyway, that'll be on the channel in the next week or two, so that'll be worth keeping an eye out for. Anyway, that'll do it for this reply to comments episode. Hope it wasn't too ranty and too all over the place, because like I say, I don't really structure this that well. It's just, yeah, addressing some of the comments that have either been annoying me a bit, or misinforming people, or just downright hilarious. Anyway, if you did like the video, you know what to do. If you want to see more content like this and you haven't subscribed, well, you also should know what to do. And if you appreciate the work we do at Unboxed, then you consider supporting us on Patreon. You will get access to our monthly live stream where we do more relaxed content like this. Tim and I just sit back and we chat with you guys about whatever the hell you want to chat with. It's a whole lot of fun, and we do that for a few hours once a month. We also have our Discord chat where we chat with you guys on a regular basis, pretty much daily. And that's also a whole lot of fun. Anyway, I am your host, Steve. The other guy's called Tim, if you're wondering. And I'll see you again next time.